Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Firewall, the business bitecast, where tech meets business. Get expert insights and real-world business leaders, IT experts, and the latest trends in bite-sized episodes. Stay ahead and explore what's beyond the firewall. And welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Firewall, where we always bring amazing speakers and guests to our show, everything from business leadership, technology, AI, and so much more. Today, we're super privileged to have a very special guest, Dr. Claire. Dr. Claire, why don't you give us a little bit of a history and background about who you are and what you've been doing for the last couple of years?
Amazing. Thank you, Erez, for having me on this podcast. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Dr. Claire Odogbo, and I am the founder and CEO of Riscofia. Riscofia is an AI-driven compliance software, and we've been building for over 2 years now. Before Riscofia, I have been working in compliance as a consultant across 6 different continents, and I lived in the Middle East for a bit. Started my career journey in PwC, went into the industry, and here I am today. Yep.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Such an amazing journey. You talked about compliance and this new business that you've been doing.
Mhm.
One of the things I think a lot of people out there are interested in understanding a little bit more is, what is compliance?
Amazing. Yes. So compliance, I find that in my line of work, I'm having to explain what compliance is a lot to people. But compliance is basically following a set of rules, right? Or processes or procedures. That's what it is at the heart of it. Now, as that applies to industries, it differs, right? There are some underlying principles that every industry should adhere to, such as segregation of duties. That means one person shouldn't be able to complete a transaction unilaterally from start to the end, especially high risk financial transaction or anything that could jeopardize the existence of the company, right? So it is having a set of guidelines or a framework that guides the operation of the organization and basis of adhering to those frameworks.
Oh, okay. Very complex. And I understand that, because you definitely don't want somebody to be processing financial transactions and doing all the approvals all the way through. And that's how we see a lot of fraud going on out there. Do you see that happening in the sense of compliance being rolled out across all businesses and industries, or is this going to be only something that's important for big business out there?
I believe that I'm a small business myself, right? And I believe compliance is important for every organization because it helps build more resilient businesses, right? When you begin to embed compliance principles from the get-go, it helps you build a stronger organization. And there's a principle of control, which it talks about being proportionate to risk. And I think that's what applies to smaller organizations. Everyone needs to have some kind of compliance framework. For example, if you are a incorporated company in Canada, you have to comply with CRA rules, whether you're a one-man band or not, so compliance is for everyone. However, the scale of your compliance operations needs to be proportionate to the risk exposure of your organization.
Interesting. Yeah. And being in IT, I think a lot of things I see today, there's a lot more of that conversation around HIPAA, GDPR, and compliance in Europe and the US. Don't hear a lot of that yet in Canada. Do you see that changing? Can you reflect on that a little bit?
Well, I think also that is more driven by the industry people are in. So here in Canada, so actually 2 things, industry and enforcement. Now, HIPAA enforces their regulations, right? So there is a more caution when it comes to HIPAA compliance. You're right. Talking with most organizations in the US about M.I.T, the first thing they ask is, are you HIPAA compliant? Which means there is an understanding and awareness about that. However, in Canada, we do have our regulations around privacy. There's PIPEDA, there's HIPAA, there are all sorts of things, right? So it depends on the organization. It depends on the industry they operate in. In the financial services industry, I find that compliance is more top of mind, especially if you have to comply with OSFI or FinTrack, and then the associated data privacy requirements also for like paper that come into play. And so people in those areas are more aware about compliance requirements. Now, when we go over to an industry like healthcare, especially for tech founders, well, they better be better compliant or else their tools are in jeopardy, right? So I just see some awareness in some industries, but it's not as prevalent as I have found and encountered in the States. Yes.
Wow. Okay. That actually sheds a lot of light in respect to that because we're in the IT world over here and we're hearing a lot of that conversation and between SOC and NIST and HIPAA and there's agencies that do the compliance and we sort of work within those frameworks to help the technology meet the requirements that the process needs to be aligned with. But I don't get a lot of requests from small, mid-sized businesses yet in Canada. Whereas in the US, you're mentioning that, the first thing they ask you is, are you HIPAA? Are you this? Are you that? Like it seems to be almost one of the first requirements when you're dealing with a US business. Whereas in Canada, it's very focused and niche based. So yeah, I concur with that. And I think that it may change in the future, but for now, it's not across the board for general business.
Absolutely.
So, Riscofia, talk to me about this. This is an interesting name. I like the name, by the way. What made you decide to become an entrepreneur and tell us a little bit about the business?
Amazing. Yes, so I've been a consultant forever and I love consulting. However, and you probably can relate to that as a consultant yourself. Consulting is limited in the sense that there's only a certain number of clients you can handle. But whilst consulting around compliance for organizations, I kept thinking about the category of businesses that you talked about, which is the small and mid-sized organizations, because most of my mandates was for larger Fortune 500 global organizations, right, who can afford a suite of senior compliance consultants and pay them, right? So my thought and my thinking to myself then was, who is serving the small and mid-sized businesses? Because I was so passionate about helping build strong controls in organizations. And so I thought about serving that group of people and kind of productizing my knowledge and my approach so that I can serve many more people than just a few clients as a consultant, especially as a solo consultant then. So that's what led me down the path of Riscofia and building out this tech tool to basically productize that knowledge and give more access globally. Like I mentioned in the intro, I have worked across 6 continents in terms of compliance frameworks. So I have a lot of exposure and I want to serve various global organizations or organizations in various jurisdictions. And so I had to build out a tool to be enable me do that. Yeah.
Very cool. So the business now is a platform to help companies become compliant and more aware of compliance. How have you bridged that gap today? Like what sort of technology are you using today to help make that more accessible?
Well, so we're using AI. AI,
Okay.
I think, has leveled the playing field for a lot of people, but it has produced its own set of risks, which I will talk about today, right now. But AI has made it so accessible. It's made it easier to create something like this, way easier than it would have been even 5 years ago, right?
Right.
So we use AI to ensure that we are identifying regulations and regulatory requirements, and that is cascaded down into our policy creation engine. And we have a whole suite of compliance training as well as tracking obligations from those regulatory requirements. So what we've tried to create with Riscofia is an end-to-end compliance management system instead of just piecemeal, as you will find. Their silos, the policies don't speak to the regulatory change or don't speak to the training or or best still, compliance is outsourced to a great consulting firm like yours or to the Vantas or Dratters, right? With no ownership. And so we do not build a compliance culture. What we're trying to do with Riscofia is to ensure that we're actually helping build resilient organizations, right? By embedding compliance into the operating framework of the organization.
Very nice. And so when you are offering this, is there a particular market that you're currently selling to, or is this a agnostic platform for all sorts of businesses from professional legal accounting all the way to manufacturing? Is there a niche today where your product is being utilized?
That's a great question. So when we built for healthcare because we wanted to niche down first and understand an industry before we scale. And so we launched in November 2025 with healthcare, but today we've expanded that to several industries, including financial services, not-for-profits, education. It is really industry agnostic. However, what we've done is things like the trainings that we create for compliance, we kind of created to suit the needs of particular industries. So, for example, what a fintech startup needs is different from what a health tech startup needs in terms of some compliance training and ed tech, and vice versa, or agri-tech. So we just create the suite of trainings that fit each industry. So we are being mindful about how we grow into several industries, but the tool as it is agnostic, industry agnostic.
Very cool. So, but your verticals are you narrowed it down for now as the seven, and then from there you may continue expanding. That's really
Absolutely.
good. Yeah, and at the end of the day, I've been doing the IT side of the compliance, and yeah, virtually every business out there can need it or can utilize some sort of a compliance if it's ISO, NIST, HIPAA, SOC, depending on where it's going. But I think certain verticals are in more need today than others, and I think that being able to specialize in those sectors may make it more accessible. So I fully support that decision process. Some people call it ICP, your ideal customer profile, when you're
Yeah,
going to go down to all these medical offices and most small medical dental operations, they're not very sophisticated networks. Their systems
absolutely.
and processes are most of the time a file folder and a
Yes.
couple printers and maybe a computer software that does the billing with OHIP or whatever insurance platform that they've got to integrate with, and not far off from dental. So those industries are now evolving significantly with, paperless and different platforms and stuff like that, but still have the same risks and responsibilities. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's an interesting transition that they're going through right now, which has not been disrupted for, a very long time. So
Yes.
yeah.
And with that transition, it poses a new set of risks, right? Because with your data up in the cloud, that's where all of your frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks come into play, right? With data privacy, security, and vulnerability, right? So
Hmm.
modernization and automation, it's great to improve the efficiency of an organization, but I, I think sometimes as founders or owners, people are not aware of the new set of risks that those things bring, right? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. We just went through a situation with a client. They had assumed that the fact that their data was in the cloud, it was backed up. And we like, no. If you read the EULA, end user licenses agreement, the Microsoft, the Amazon, the Googles of the world, and 99% of most third party applications that you're using as cloud storage does not
Hmm.
provide archiving, backup. It gives you what's called high availability. So in the event that the server is compromised or goes down, they'll spin one up somewhere else right away and you won't feel it. But if a hacker gets into your cloud infrastructure and steals the data, they're not responsible for your password management and recovery
Absolutely.
of all your data.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
seen that time and time again.
Hmm.
So, what's the most common, let's call it challenges for businesses today when they want to get into this journey of moving into a compliance and working with you guys?
I think the challenge is, first of all, understanding what your risks are, right? And solving for that. So in my world of tech, you find, and you've mentioned a lot, SOC 2. It usually occurs like I'm chasing after this big organization, let's say an Amazon, and I want them to be my client. And the first thing they ask is, do you have SOC 2? And then as the founder, I start racing to get SOC 2 compliant just because of the certificate that is dependent, or a deal is dependent on having that certificate, right?
Correct.
So I find that process happening a lot. So people are not necessarily thinking about it from a risk management perspective. It's more like I need to fulfill certain prerequisites to be able to get this deal. And so let me go get SOC 2 certified. And in my mind, that's what I call outsourcing the responsibility, because you might have a SOC 2 certified certificate, but doesn't mean that you have built a process that actually supports and builds a compliance culture. You have a tool that monitors things for you, puts certain things in place, and you're good. So, in my view, a compliance program should be done thoughtfully and intentionally, starting with the actual risk assessment of the organization. What do we do? What kind of risk exposure do we have across several areas? And then how can we use tools to support our risk management program, not the tool being the program itself? Now, our approach as Riscofia is that we have been intentional and starting from regulatory risk, because those are some of the highest risk, and embedded in regulatory risk are also data privacy risk, cybersecurity risk. So we had to make a call on what's the best risk to help organizations manage, knowing that if they have that covered, they have most of the other risks covered. And so we decided that that approach would be regulatory compliance. And so what we do with Riscofia is we help create a structured compliance program through the tool so that people are on this compliance journey that is more intentional and hopefully embeds the compliance approach into the culture of the organization.
Okay. And so who's going to be the lead on that? So like when you're talking about rolling that out within an organization, is that going to be the CEO? I see a lot of times the finance department is the one that takes charge within the organization. So the accountant somehow de facto is always the rule maker in an organization to set these things up. Where do you see within organizations trying to implement this kind of, I'm not going to call it rules, but buying in? Where do you see that in an organization today?
So it depends on the organization and the size of the organization. So for a larger established healthcare organization, I see the quality departments, right? So where they have a quality department, the tool resonates immediately because it saves them time, hours and hours of time, and helps them stay inspection ready, which is something I talk about a lot. But for smaller organizations, is usually the CEO or the owner that cares about these things. And depending on what the driver is, especially as they get into those contracts conversations and people are asking them questions, then they start scrambling looking for a compliance tool, right? So it really depends on the kind of business, the size and scale of business today. And other times it might be the COO, actually. I find that it's the head of operations that's looking at these tools, surprisingly, and not necessarily the finance department. But it depends on, again, the size of the organization.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that because when we went through, we're actually almost finished up our ISO. same thing. Like I know I'm a busy entrepreneur. I'm running a business. I'm doing my thing. There's no way I can sit down and actually read every document and go through the processes to enable ISO. And so I've appointed that to exactly that, our CIO or CTO to that are, they're engaged, they're more detail oriented, they're able to go through the processes and then instill it within the organization more effectively. And then
Mm-hmm.
we just have our weekly, bi-weekly meetings to discuss what processes we're going to implement.
Totally.
So I'm going to pivot like change wheels here a little bit about that. So you mentioned that, you're an AI company first, that you've been able to now be able to deliver this technology to the general business population from small medical and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about how AI has been implemented and how you're leveraging that today and yet being secure? Let's go on the first question and then we'll talk about security and compliance. How did you use AI to get to where you are today?
Well, AI helps automate, I think, the speed to delivery, which is what most people are finding with the use of AI. You can take an idea from a concept to implementation in minutes instead of months. And that's exactly what we did. So for a for us, it was important that AI helps identify regulatory requirements. And so that was like a big use case for us, and we went with it to help build the tool, as well as other customizations we've used within the tool, and we keep developing. As you know, most technologies have a roadmap, and we keep reinventing ourselves, keep updating our functionality based on user feedback. Yeah,
And so, there's all this conversation about my data as an AI and it's now public domain, it's in ChatGPT, Claude, the security risks. Like how are you managing AI and privacy and compliance around that?
that's a great question, and I had to do and build intentionally, right? So the version of Riscofia today that we have is a little bit scaled back version from what we initially envisaged, and where we ran up against where the risk exposure from private data privacy, right, and sensitive data. So how we build and how we've built intentionally is to ensure that the data of our users are secure and there's no proprietary information being entered into AI, basically, right? So we've thought about our risks and intentionally built to mitigate them as an organization, and that's part of what I encourage founders to do, to take a step back instead of just happily building out the vision. That's great. But also think strategically about the risk exposures as you build certain functionality or release certain features.
So when you say you're not putting anything proprietary in the AI, are you segmenting you're separating the private data into like a repository or a conventional secure data vault, and then you're using AI to augment sort of precedents and repositories of templates? Is that how you're pulling the two systems together?
Yes. So AI does. So in our model, there's a separation between what AI does and what AI feeds and what the organization does, right? So organization data, repositories, AI provides some additional context around some of that data. But as of today, we're ensuring that AI doesn't necessarily have access to sensitive information about any organization on our platform.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, and do you see governments down the road changing their song about, what's secure, what's not secure around AI and compliance these days?
That's it. That's an interesting conversation. I see, like, for example, think about Claude, right? With the ban and then the permission, right? A
Yeah.
few days after. And in my mind, I was like, wow, did they go lobby the government or what? So So these organizations that are leading the AI race are massive. Their budgets are probably bigger than some countries' budgets, right?
For sure.
So they have the muscle to lobby governments and to change the direction. So I do see like a less what's the word, a relaxation in some rules around AI coming. However, it doesn't take away the risk, right? So an organization decides to use AI, you expose yourself to some risks that you have to manage and own. Like you said about the cloud storage. If you use AI for your business, it exposes customers' sensitive information and data. You are the one responsible. You can't go blame Claude, right? Or GPT or
No.
any of those, right? So that's where the education piece of compliance is so important so that people understand what they're getting themselves into when they use these products. They're amazing productivity tools, but they also come with their risk, which you need to be aware of and take a decision about. So, conversely, I think insurance claims are going to go up, or premiums are going to go up, because you have to find a way to manage that risk somewhere, right?
Yeah, I know. I fully agree with you on this. I think, you know, good example, and I'm a little bit of a nerd here. I grew up with Star Trek and stuff like that, and even Star Wars. If you think about it, with R2D2 and some of the technology back then, but it was more in Star Trek where the computer was already there as part of an AI technology, right? It would be like computer open communications, analysis. And yeah, I remember watching, I think it was Second Generation or something like that, where they created a virtual doctor. I forgot his name, but I remember it was like this shocking thing where you had a human doctor working with a virtual doctor, and they were conversing back and forth and arguing on the diagnosis of a patient. And, when you look at that, I can relate to that today, because today we're talking about what they term the term that is currently being used is hallucinations, right? Like
Right.
we're saying AI creates these hallucinations. They want to make us happy, or they want to make the solution work. And so lawyers have been caught, using cases that didn't exist, and the AI generated all the case facts. And now, from what I've heard, and again, it's a hearsay, lawyers are now responsible that if they use AI to generate any casework, they're 100% responsible for presenting and verifying all that data before they bring it to court. Otherwise, they can have the entire case thrown out. I think we're looking at that next evolution of realizing it is a tool. It's how you orchestrate it. That there's a job terminology I think that's going to be generated very soon called an AI orchestrator or AI manager of some sort. And then from there, it's a matter of, putting guardrails around that, even if you do want to fully implement it and utilize it. We're seeing so many challenges on the technology, and I can't imagine what that looks like on an operational standpoint to keep, guardrails and sort of security around data operations and how people are, utilizing it with any sort of sense of security. Forget productivity is there. It's not the issue of the productivity. It's what's the future outcome of the whole thing.
Absolutely. I think like even I don't know when you got on the AI train, since you're a nerd, a self-proclaimed one,
Yeah.
but in the past 2, 3 years, we can see how much AI has evolved. And it's been here. We know it's been here. There have been AI models since, I mean, way longer than we most people know. Uh, I feel like it's gonna keep evolving. AI is going to keep evolving, and there are guardrails that need to be in place. I don't know how soon we'll get to the point where AI monitors itself, because the guardrails need to be there. Now, today, even with agentic AI, we still need human guardrails, we're finding. Tomorrow, there might be a situation where AI becomes a guardrail to AI,
Yep.
And so the world is evolving very quickly, right? Think about mobile phones, the year 2000 and the mobile phones we had in the year 2000, right? Compared to the mobile phones we have today and what they can do.
Hmm.
So AI is just going to keep evolving and evolving. It's going to be a new normal, and it impacts every industry, even publishing. What we talk about as proprietary information, for example, IP and all of those things. I know that AI is going to disrupt those industries. It's already disrupting it, right? For authors like myself, what does writing in 2026 look like today versus writing in 2020, right? So it's just going to keep evolving. And that's why responsible AI is so important. Ethics is going to take more center stage more than ever before, because I think what's the right use of AI versus wrong use is blurring much more than it was 2 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, and I think those policies are going to make some significant changes in the next 12 months or less because, I know that governments are talking about banning social media from children, I think under 16 or 18. As an adult and as a IT company, I can tell you I'd be all for it because I think that it is changing the fabric of the way youth is growing up today. I think that there's a lot of
Or-
misuse and ethics around how companies are manipulating ages in that bracket from 4 years old till 16, 17. Like it's very manipulative for them to buy, how they communicate. Like it's worse than a magazine.
Yeah,
And there's a lot more behind that. So I fully agree that ethics is going to be a conversation that maybe you want to spearhead that one. But I would say, I think nobody's really talking about the ethics around AI or how that's going to impact society today.
definitely. It's gonna impact society, and there's another conversation also around AI use. What about the third world? And does it put them further at a disadvantage when it comes to the AI adoption race? Right?
Oh, yeah, for
You
sure.
know,
They're done. They're in a bigger, they're going to go further into debt or into behind schedule.
yes, yes. So think about a what a 15-year-old kid can do and access in the US or in Canada versus in Zimbabwe, right? Or
Hmm.
any of those third world or Asian countries also. So what are we doing in terms of creating equity, and access? Even as the world is really jumping on this AI train. So there are a lot of ethics questions and leaving segments of the world behind, questions that need to be addressed. But at the end of the day, we know that the economics of it's driving a lot of the decisions around it as it stands today.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's multiple conversations I have with people around that. I think that, yes, there's economy, there's this corporate, there's a lot of this political, we've got to get to it, we've got to build it out. People also don't realize that countries like China, North Korea, and other countries around the world are building AI agents as well, and they're not restricted to public markets. And if they get ahead of it, that can also be another conversation that we're not even having yet in North America in the sense of what happens if, somebody like China or North Korea or Russia becomes an AI superpower. It's no longer a military race, it's an AI race now that's happening as we speak.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So Dr. Claire, like I know we're coming up to the top of the hour here. I just wanted to ask you like a sort of a wrap up question here. So, as a business and as a business owner and listeners out there, if they want to understand a little bit more about Riscofia, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, they can just get onto our website, riscofia.ca, and yeah, reach out to us, drop a note, and myself or someone on my team will get back to them. Yeah.
Amazing. And I think we have to have another conversation around a few more items here because I think we started peeling back the onion, and I think we could have done a 2-hour podcast today, but obviously it there's a lot to unpack here. Definitely we'll reach out to you, maybe set up another call, but thank you for being on our podcast. You're an incredible guest. So much to discuss around compliance and regulations. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, thank you all listeners. We hope you like and enjoy today's episode. Please like and subscribe. We will bring some more amazing speakers, and hopefully we'll have Dr. Claire back on our show. Thank you again. Have yourself a great day.
And you too.